Hello, friends. Welcome to another Word of Gord. Today, I'd like to discuss, once again, as a sequel to my first talk on the film Astral City, the Brazilian film about the afterlife. A fine film, and I hope you, all of you, can track it down on DVD someplace. This film brings up many interesting issues that I'm either personally familiar with or have access to other examples of similar situations written by other people from other cultures. And I'd like to illuminate your understanding with some of these examples. Now, the first thing that struck me personally, with my own experiences, is the Brazilian doctor's sort of immediate transfer to the, not quite the lowest hell, but certainly a nasty little purgatorial realm. As I recall, he woke up with his lying in a muddy puddle. And later on in the movie, when he reaches the Astral City, it's either explained to him or he realizes himself that he had some sort of inner moral bankruptcy had led to his transfer to this purgatory. Now, it seemed to me that he was, a man of accomplishment and qualities, perhaps a little too rigid and a little too self-satisfied with his place in society, but he did care for his family, and he seemed like a fairly decent human being to me. So I was a little surprised, and still am, that he would, be taken to that, or his own lack of moral qualities would lead him to that purgatorial realm. But we wind up in places in the afterlife that are ultimately our own self-judgment, the results of our own self-judgment. And we're all very critical of ourselves, let's face it. We are our own worst judges. And perhaps that is the case with that man. I just wanted to comment that the film's portrayal of his life was, not that bad. He could have been an alcoholic doctor that had drank himself to death and left his family in rack and ruin. He did not do that. Anyway, that portrayal of the purgatorial realms, sort of slightly above the hell realms, is equaled in a number of places, and I'd like to give you an example of one of those places. It's from a book called My Dear Alexias by Wellesley Tudor Pole, a name perhaps not known to you, a spiritual teacher of some accomplishment in the early part of the 20th century in Britain, and who left a number of books to his credit. Now, he did speak in these letters, and this book is still in print as far as I know. The letters, this is not channeling, letters between Tudor Pole and Rosamund Leman were done in the mid-60s and refer to various parts of Wellesley's life, both in body and out of body. And in one of the letters, he speaks in detail about a astral reception center near what he calls the borderlands, which in British spiritualist terms is similar to what is portrayed in the Brazilian film. Now, he describes this astral reception center in detail, and in another letter, I'll get to that in a moment, and in another letter, he refers to some of Rosamund's questions. And let me try to delve into that. I had to leave before the conference was over. This is out of body, by the way, to keep an appointment elsewhere with the elder brother who is in charge of the many groups of missionary volunteers working in the lower borderlands' densest jungles on dangerous salvage operations. Dante's description of Hades pales before what is to be encountered in these age-old swamps, black bogs and quicksands. Souls once human, whose identity is almost lost, deliberate followers of the dark road, distracted wandering beings, many creatures subhuman and animal. All these are to be met with and struggled with and salvaged if at all possible. Although one ventures into these regions clothed in a kind of protective, luminous, quote-unquote, asbestos, one emerges shaken and deeply depressed. So I think that's revealing. Now here's a description in more detail of the way station, as he calls it, an astral reception center for the recently dead. And he describes it in this little chapter of a letter, which he calls Diary of an Average Night's Activities. First hour. Arrive at my own home, which is situated in a mountain valley and on its slopes, 2 levels of rhythm above the borderland region, which surrounds and, in a way, interpenetrates our own planet. Met by my Arab servitor, who prepares the bath, brackets, light, color, music, liquid waves, and sets out fresh garments for each visit. Bathe and dress. If time allows, visit my stables and farm, talk to my head gardener about the trees and flowers in the home gardens. Then mount my favorite steed and make the long descending journey into the borderland to visit the HQ offices of the Red Cross service station, which I have helped to build and equip, extend and staff during the past 60 years. And I believe he means 60 years Earth time. Cosmic light cannot reach down to this level. We have therefore our own generators powered by swift streams which cascade down the ravines in the mountains, by which the station is surrounded and protected. The area of the station is the equivalent of 2 square miles on Earth. It contains hospitals, rest homes, lecture and concert halls, farms, gardens, children's playgrounds, and an animal, bird, and insect sanctuary. The staff quarters alone occupy a site equal to a small garden city on Earth, with nearly 2,000 occupants, doctors, healers, teachers, nurses, orderlies, musicians, artists. There are rarely fewer than 25,000 persons there, including patients, pilgrims, passersby, and missionaries. All the workers are volunteers willing to delay their own evolutionary ascent to more delectable spheres. Now I get the sense that a lot of these so-called workers are permanent residents. They are dead. But we can see that he goes there every night while he's asleep, and perhaps, I'm sure others do, just it's not made clear here how many of each category there are. The sentinels should not be forgotten. They stand on guard all around the station circumference, keeping at bay the pressure of waves of darkness by which this area of borderland is filled almost to overflowing. So strenuous is their work that they have to be relieved at very frequent intervals. So you can get a sense of the dark, nasty forces reaching up from the hell realms. And they're basically just trying to snatch people into a lower hell. And the people that are in these kind of lower purgatorial levels, even though if they've just died, can be led astray because they have the weaknesses that make them vulnerable to such temptation, if you like. Second hour, conferences with senior staff, discussion of station problems, tour of inspection, meeting and greeting newcomers, helping to train staff for special duties, entertaining guests who may visit our station from other levels of life, and prayer. Third hour, if there has been a large intake due to some accident on Earth, then my stay is usually prolonged into the third hour. Otherwise, I ride around the station's outer walls and visit the sentinels, and sometimes act as one myself. Fourth hour, nowadays spent with the College of Heralds, of which I am a member. This is situated on high ground, surrounded by lovely groves of trees, planted to provide distant vistas away to the horizon in every direction. The plain itself is 3 levels of rhythm above the borderland. Listen to and take part in a conference conducted usually by a senior herald, during which all kinds of problems are discussed and solutions found if possible. For instance, how to best train and equip forerunners, whether to be in bodily incarnation or not. Study of the temperature of human consciousness among various tribes, races, nations, and individuals on Earth. Perhaps the equipping of a particular herald to go forth as guide to someone on Earth who is carrying out a special mission. Above all, intensive training with lamps lit to be prepared when the supreme call is sounded. Usually by now I am watching the clock, so to speak, as I dare not overstep the 5-hour period allotted to me each night, where otherwise bodily life and work in daytime would suffer. Fifth hour. Unless called away for meetings on higher levels, I return to my own home, stable my steed, go into my library, to which a first-class observatory is attached, and try to get a little rest. But not for long, because always there is a queue of people waiting in the gardens outside, seeking counsel or solace or healing, or merely companionship. Long before the end of the file is reached, I have to call a halt, disrobe, take a bath, put on my earth-level garments, and prepare to re-enter my mundane frame. This summary only touches upon the very fringe of one's otherworldly activities, which, according to the needs of the hour and occasion, vary. Now and again, for instance, one is obliged to ride up into much higher spheres than usual, perhaps at the summons of messengers or their principles of the hierarchy. When this happens, apart from the short preparations for the journey made inside my own home, at least 4 hours of the allotted span are taken up this way. Incidentally, I have built on my estate a very comfortable and inspiring guest house, where friends and colleagues are always welcome, from both sides of the veil. I only wish I could devote more time to their entertainment. So, another vision of the afterlife way stations, which are situated all around the planet, above all nations, and do the daily tasks of receiving certain levels of consciousnesses as they pass through the transition we call death. So, I found another book which has some interesting comments of this nature on an afterlife community devoted to the care and nurturing of spirits just passed. This is from a book called Testimony of Light by the now deceased British medium Helen Greaves, and she channels the spirit of a friend of hers, Frances Banks, who was a nun who worked in English prison, working with the prisoners, helping to rehabilitate them. And when she transits, which is recounted in this book, she goes to an astral plane community very similar to the one that she left. and continues her work with, a little breathing space to recover from her transition. She passed from cancer, I might add. Quite a painful passing. And she speaks at length about a surgeon who had passed, feeling terribly guilty about his addiction to drugs, and has a great deal of difficulty coping with his sense of remorse and guilt. And she speaks about how they help him recover. And they're watching a movie of his life, a review of his life, and she watches it with him. With Mother Florence and Sister Hilda, I went to the operating theatre, as we call it here. Dr. X was already there in the care of Father Joseph. The room, if you could call it such, is a long rectangle with a kind of domed ceiling that gives the impression of unlimited space. We sat facing a vista of blueness which appeared to shimmer. There is no wall, just a deep cerulean blue space. I seemed to hear singing, though there is no organ or choir. But there was a faint music of the spheres, which is quite indescribable, so soothing that one's spirit rises up to float out and participate in the sound. Suddenly, without preamble, this blue vista broke up and became a cinema or television screen. Pictures began to emerge on it. They were not superimposed as in a cinema, but seemed to grow into it from the very ether itself. These pictures appeared to form themselves. They showed moments of stress, moments of triumph, moments of failure in the earth life of Dr. X. We saw patients. We watched him in his diagnoses. We followed him to the theatre and witnessed his operations. And as we watched, we became conscious, as he did, of the great light that enfolded him as he worked. The pictures on the screen went on and on. We were taken into the homes, lives, families of those on whom the doctor had performed his successful operations. We saw the benefit to humanity, the healings, the resumption of happy, useful lives, which were the result of this man's skill. Even when he was working under the influence of drugs, as he said, we were allowed to view the results of what he had accomplished. I was more than moved. I felt wrung with compassion and a new understanding. Here was a man standing before the bar of his own judgment, and the scales were showing the balancing up of his actions and the resulting effects of his service. And when we were shown the skill and success with which he had brought a great musician back to health and strength, the scales seemed almost to balance. That musician was enabled to go on and leave the world a richer and more exalted by his performances, to add his portion to the beauty that penetrates the materialism of earth thinking, to lighten with glorious sound that darkness into which men sink, and to uplift their spirits into thankfulness to the Creator. As the film of his life unwound before us, the doctor saw, though he could scarcely credit it, that he had indeed done his part. He had followed his pattern, worked out his blueprint, even though he had badly smudged it in the performance. At the end, he saw, he understood. His fault had been a weakness in the soul's contract with the personality, which he had allowed to widen until it threatened to break completely. But he had been released before that happened. His failure had been his refusal to delve into that inner one whom he knew. So contact him deliberately and reverently at times, other than when the celestial surgeon's skill was needed. The light had been within him and about him, and he had comprehended it not. If I should say that there were tears in his eyes when the revelation ended, I would be partly right. There were tears in his soul, tears for lost opportunities, but also tears of relief. I am indeed learning that we must not judge from our very partial understanding. This man, failure as he had seemed, had achieved much. He had been a channel of light, even though he had tried to ignore the implications of this, and even despite the fact that his personality had sunk into a bog of illusions. So, there is much more in that book. There's some very interesting material dealing with the soul of Nancy, who had to confront one of his victims from one of the camps, and how they meet in the middle of their challenging situation. Anyway, another time perhaps. So, some relevant material for you to ponder as you either find or do not find this film, The Astral City. And I'm glad I was able to get it across. There exists in this house a large library of spiritualist material, which you've heard me refer to from time to time. And it's all extremely relevant and useful in our afterlife studies. But there's only so much time one can devote to YouTube videos. One has a life and one has other concerns. But it will all unravel in good time, I am sure. So, blessings and greetings from Word of Gord and Bach. May you all have a lovely day and benefit from these teachings, this information, as I have in my time. Goodbye for now.